טוב ולשלם איזה זכות להיות אצל רבינו להיות אצל רבינו מאומן טוב שינאידת שנת שבת אצל רבי נחמן באומן לשנה טובה תכסה וסכסה לאונטר חיים וטוב ולשלם לשנה טובה תכסה וסכסה לאונטר חיים וטוב ולשלם לשנה טובה תכסה וסכסה לאונטר חיים וטוב ולשלם לשנה טובה תכסה וסכסה לאונטר חיים וטוב ולשלם.
What a lovely song from Moshe Storch. He sang a good year, Shana Tova. We're still wishing each other a good year, Shana Tova, or we customarily say at Rosh Hashanah, even by Yom Kippur. We're still saying it. It's still the beginning of the year. And this whole holiday season, it extends, right? We all come before the heavenly court for our decree for the coming year at Rosh Hashanah. And a decree is given, but it's held in suspension until Yom Kippur to see what kind of a teshuvah, what kind of an atonement we're making during those days of awe. An atonement accompanied by tzedakah, giving to righteous causes, charity, and by tefillah, prayer. And hopefully we sweeten the decree by the time Yom Kippur comes around. But even then, the decree is not considered final. It's sort of like the gates are closing. They might have even closed at the end of Yom Kippur. It's like the gates closed, but we can still slip a note under the door, as it were, with our dedication to Torah and to God and to the sweetness of having a relationship with God through this period. And we rejoice in that sweetness, and that's what Sukkot is all about, which begins tomorrow night. It will coincide with Shabbos. We have the 8-day festival of Sukkot. And it's going to be beautiful. I've already posted some pictures. We've built our sukkah in our driveway, and we're going to try to have all our meals in the sukkah during that whole week. Some people even sleep in the sukkah. That is ideal because one considers the sukkah his permanent residence, and his house or his apartment where he normally lives, for that week, it's considered the temporary residence. That's the period that we're in. That's what we're still singing about. Today, we've got an amazing amount of stuff to cover, a beautiful daf. We're going to learn about Acher, the sage who went bad. It's an incredible story, has a lot of wrinkles, nuances, and permutations, and even uplifting implications. We've got to cover some material before we get to that, so we're going to keep it moving. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us on this fine Thursday night as we're getting close to Shabbos and Sukkot, or in the more Ashkenaz pronunciation, Sukkos? Who is with us this evening? Let's see. Stephen from Dover, New Hampshire. Melissa from Great Neck, New York. Nancy from Southern Pines, North Carolina. Lucy from Minnesota. Gwen from Michigan. Joy from New Jersey. James with us from Indianapolis. Michelle Vizina Peterlin says Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom from Indiana. I look forward to this program every day. Thank you so much, Michelle. Guy from Dayton, Ohio. Meggie Lynn Scott saying shalom from Ostrander, Ohio, and I'm heading off to sleep, but sharing for my friends. Krista with us from Lubbock, Texas, wishing us a good Yontif. You know, we often pronounce it good Yontif, right? Y-O-N-T-I-F, but what we're actually, and some say that's Yiddish, but really what we're saying is good Yomtiv, right? It's Yom Tov, meaning Yom Tov, right? Yom Tov, the holiday. Deborah, but I always used to say Yomtiv, but now it's like you want to say it right, like Yomtiv. It's Yomtiv, right? It's really Y-O-M-T-O-V, but we just say it fast and it becomes Yomtiv. There we go. Deborah Butler, bidding you peace from Canada. Sharon from Lebanon, New Jersey. Diana Ruth Davidson Lerner. Shalom from San Diego. I started listening to you to AT Daily when I was in the hospital from September 14th to 24th. Thank you for helping me heal. Diana, Thank you for sharing the good news. We're so happy that you've healed and you're out of the hospital. May your recovery be complete and speedy. KP Newforth saying shalom from the League of Women Voters of Kansas. And Dolly says good morning. And Bernard says Hag Sameach. And Linda's with us from South Florida. Hannah Rivka's with us. John Shore from Sedona. Baki is with us from Dhaka in Bangladesh. Welcome, Baki. And please, by the way, people, if it's your first time listening to the show, let us know so that we can welcome you. Gail from Ohio. Allie is with us, tagging her friend Kim. Marty from New Jersey. Allie's with us from Florida. Michal from Southern Michigan. Paula from Chicago. Lesek says hi. Clint is with us from North Carolina. And Tom says Yontif is Yiddish. Okay, so Yontif is Yiddish. Thank you, Tom. Christo. Some people say Yontif, but around here in this neighborhood, it always comes out to Yom Tov. So I don't know. It's just a preference. Darcy says is with us from Redlands. Sharon she's recommending the book As a Driven Leaf, which is about Acher. We're going to be learning about him, and his name before he became Acher was Elisha ben Abuye. Barbara from Brooklyn. Darcy says hello. Bill with us from Arkansas. Bar Muriat from Kenya. Wow, Bar Muriat, welcome. Great to have you with us over on the YouTube side. Lynn in Texas, and Marasia says shalom. Marasia, you're in Atlanta, if I don't mistake. Okay, let's get into it. We have a lot to do. Where are we? This is Daf Nun Beis. That's page 52, tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. Today, with God's help, we're going to finish our discussion of chapter 4. We've been talking about Mishnah number 5 for a few days. The fourth Mishnah took several days. Today, we're going to finish our discussion of Mishnah number 5 and run through Mishnahs 6, 7, and 8. They're all on this same page of the Talmud. So much to do. Okay, so we don't even have to review where we've been because the first case that we're talking about is a review. Rabba bar Rav Hanan would make a weekly declaration of where his Shabbos dwelling would be situated, and that would be between his home in Artib Bena and Pumbedisa. So he lives in Artib Bena. His house is in Artib Bena. But every Shabbos, he likes to walk over to Pumbedisa, nearby town in Babylonia, which is where Rav Yosef would teach on Shabbos, right? So he wanted to get from Artib Bena over to Pumbedisa. So, as we know, the Shabbos Techum, the boundary, we can only walk, right, 2,000 cubits in any direction from our Shabbos dwelling. But if our dwelling is in a town or in a city, the 2,000 cubits begins at the edge of the town, the limits of the town. So what was he trying to do? He could get to the edge of his town, and then 2,000 more cubits would not get him to Pumbedisa. But it would get him to a little settlement in between Artib Bena and Pumbedisa. And that settlement, what was it called? And it was called, what was it called? It doesn't really matter. But I just wanted to get that name. He would declare Tzinta, that my residence is in Tzinta. Okay? So Tzinta is just this little hamlet, this little settlement, very little town, in between Artib Bena and Pumbedisa. So it was within 2,000 cubits of the city limits of Artib Bena, where he lived. And it was within 2,000 cubits of the city limits of Pumbedisa, where he was going. So the point is that if he didn't make his Shabbos dwelling in this little town in between the two big towns, he wouldn't be able to get to Pumbedisa. It would be too far outside his Shabbos boundary. So this is exactly what we're talking about with Erev Techumen. He's going to shift his Shabbos dwelling to this spot, which is within his present place. It's within 2,000 cubits plus the city limits of his home, and his destination is within 2,000 cubits plus the city limits of where of that Shabbos dwelling that he's establishing, that little settlement of Tzinta. And so this is going to work. What's the problem? every Shabbos, or every Friday, right, every Erev Shabbos, he would declare, my Shabbos dwelling, my shvisa, right, my dwelling is going to be for Shabbos in that little town of Tzinta. Does it work? No, it doesn't work. Abuye challenged him, and he said, do you rely on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion as understood by Rav Chisda, that you think that when you're sitting in your house, you can make a declaration of where your Shabbos dwelling is going to be? But haven't we already established that the halacha, the law, follows Rav Nachman's understanding of the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, and therefore only a person who is a traveler on the road and is afraid that he's not going to make it in time because it's getting late in the day, it's getting dark, and he's going to be stuck outside his town, right? He's going to be stuck outside where he's just going to be like, kind of camping for Shabbos. But he can say, I know a specific place, might be a tree, a specific tree, and he's going to pick a 4-cubit location right next to the trunk of the tree, or it might be an enclosure, an enclosed field, or a mound, or a pit that's separated from the public domain. It could even be a town, a whole town, because a whole town will work. But he can only make that declaration if he's a traveler on the road. You can't do that if you're sitting in your house. That's what we learned yesterday, the way that Rav Nachman explained that dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. And so now that Abuye challenges Rabbah bar Rav Hanan about his weekly declaration, Rabbah bar Rav Hanan says, oh, you're right. I retract my declaration, right? So Rabbah bar Rav Hanan was no slouch. It's not like he was just some ignorant guy. He was doing a very carefully measured, declaration that he thought was well within the law, but he made a mistake. And when he realized his mistake, when Abuye showed him where his logic, his reasoning, his legal reasoning had, made a mistake, he said, okay, I made a mistake. I'm not going to do it anymore. I mean, this could happen easily, right? And these are great sages who, had the entire oral tradition up to their time memorized, right? But there were so many rulings and often conflicting rulings, and a person could make a mistake. And they relied on each other to sharpen their reasoning and understanding. And when they realized they were wrong, they copped to it, right? And it's beautiful that the Talmud here, the Gemara, sort of memorializes that somebody, thought he was doing it right, came to understand he was doing it wrong, retracted his ruling, and this is an example. It's a model of what we're supposed to do. We always need to be learning. Sometimes we're going to make mistakes. When we make a mistake, we cop to the mistake, and then we adjust our behavior accordingly. That brings us to Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 4. Let me read that to you. If a person set out to go on Erev Shabbos, right, on Friday, before Shabbos began, to a town for which an Erev is established in order to go there on Shabbos, and another person caused him to return home, he himself is permitted to go to that city on Shabbos, and for all the other residents of the town where he lives, it is prohibited to go there. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, that was confusing. That is definitely confusing. And how do we know that it's confusing? Because we're now going to get 5 different interpretations of what that Mishnah just said. Before we even jump into it, we're going to have 4 interpretations here in the Gemara, the discussion which follows that Mishnah. But before we even go there, I'm going to mention that Rav Steinsaltz, here in his commentary on the Talmud, points out that in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud, right? The Jerusalem Talmud was actually less authoritative and less complete, even though it was compiled in the Holy Land. There was so much Roman oppression there that the project, as it were, was not finished. And that's why Daf Yomi, our 7.5-year journey through the Talmud, is based on Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. It has nothing to do with the Babylonians themselves. It was the great sages in the Jewish community that was based in Babylonia, that created the Babylonian Talmud, and it's more complete because they had, I don't know, 100 years more to work on it than they had over in the Holy Land. Nevertheless, there are many, many important teachings in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, and here Rav Steinsaltz is bringing down one of them. He says that this particular Mishnah, this because the Mishnah is the same. It's the Talmud, the Gemaras that are different in the Yerushalmi than in the Bavli. So when this Mishnah is discussed in the Jerusalem Talmud, they interpret it completely differently. So first I'm just going to mention what it says in the Jerusalem Talmud that Rav Steinsaltz brings down for us. This Mishnah is discussing a case where the residents of a town sent a messenger to establish an Eruv for them with a basket of food, right? So we're talking about the Eruv Techumen. We want to move everybody's Shabbos dwelling, just like that case that we're talking about with what's his name, Rabba bar Rav Chanan, right? They want to go from their town, let's say for argument's sake, in Artibena, over to Pumbedisa. And if they don't shift their dwelling to in between the two towns, it's going to be too far to walk. It won't be within their Shabbos boundary. But if they can declare their Shabbos dwelling is between the two towns, then it's going to be close enough to each of the towns that they can get there. Right? It's less than 2,000 cubits from the city limits of where they are to what is going to be their Shabbos dwelling, and it's less than 2,000 cubits from their declared Shabbos dwelling over to the new town where they'd like to go. And once they're in the town, they can roam all around the town because the limits within a town is considered like a person's place, like a personal space of 4 cubits. When it's in a town, it extends throughout the town. That's a leniency of the sages. So all these people in town A want to get over to town B for Shabbos, and they sent a messenger to establish that Shabbos dwelling for them. And they told him to deposit, as their agent, a basket of food with 2 meals worth of food representing everybody. And I don't know how much food actually has to be in there. It's not really 2 meals for every individual. It's enough that it's representative for the whole town. So they sent him there to establish a dwelling in that spot. He got to that spot, but something went wrong, and he did not deposit the basket of food there. So in that situation, he did establish a Shabbos dwelling for himself there, because he was there with his feet when Shabbos began. So he has that dwelling for himself, but he didn't deposit the basket of food, so he didn't complete his agency for the people of the town. They did not acquire an Eruv. And then we're going to talk about the second part of this Mishnah, which makes sense according to what we just said and the way the Jerusalem Talmud reads it. Rabbi Meir says, anyone who can establish an Eruv and negated his residence in his original place, but did not establish an Eruv. In other words, somebody attempted to establish an Eruv, like the people of that town. It was their desire that their Shabbos dwelling should be in that intermediate town. It didn't happen because their agent failed in his job. Maybe it wasn't his fault. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but something went wrong and he did not deposit the food there. So he established for himself. He did not establish for them. But because they sought to establish, even though it failed, there's no doubt, no new Eruv was created for those people in the town. But because they tried to create a new one, according to Rabbi Meir, they are now in the position of a Hammer Gamel. I haven't been using that Hebrew word for that, but I've been telling you they're between a donkey driver and a camel driver, and it's such a good term in Hebrew, the Hammer Gamel, right? So the Hammer Gamel, the Hammer is the donkey driver, the Gamel is the camel driver. The donkey driver leads donkeys from in front, the camel driver sort of urges the camels along from behind, meaning that these people are going to lose their dwelling where they start in their town, and they're not going to acquire in the new place, but the only place where they're going to be allowed to move is where those two domains, those two Sabbath boundaries intersect. And if they don't, well, I mean, they're in their town, so they're going to be able to roam around the town, but they're not going to be able to go any further in any direction that isn't in both boundaries, the one that they sought to negate and the one that they sought to acquire, even though they didn't acquire it. In a moment, we'll talk about why that's a chiddush. There's something new about that, even though we thought we already had that teaching and that both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda agreed on it. Now we're going to see, no, this is not something they agree on. It's something new in this Mishna. But before we get there, so that's how the Jerusalem Talmud understood this, right? They sent an agent to establish an Eruv with a food basket. He didn't deposit the food basket, so he acquired an Eruv because he was there with his feet, but he didn't do it for them. Okay, that's how the Jerusalem Talmud understands it. The Babylonian Talmud, the Talmud Bavli, understands it differently. So, Rav Huna says, what's actually going on here, the reason that this person acquired for himself but the other people didn't, is because he has a special circumstance. According to Rav Huna, this is a guy who has a house in the town with everybody else, and he has like a lake house, a summer house, a weekend house. He has a second home in the other town. Okay, in the other town. So he's on the road. He's on the road, and he is not going there on a mission on behalf of the other people, right? Even if he was, I think this would still work. But what's happening is like this. He sets out on the road going to his other home. So he's on the road. He's not on the road in order to get somewhere and establish a Shabbos dwelling. He's on the road to his other home. Once he's on the road to his other home, if it's starting to get dark, then this is the same case as our previous Mishnah, a traveler on the road who is an ani, a pauper, can declare a Shabbos residence in a specific place with his mouth, even though he hasn't deposited food there and he's not at that place already with his feet. Now, hold on. I just told you this guy has two homes. He's got a home in one town. He's got another home in the other town. How is he an ani? How is he a pauper? He's a pauper because he's on the road and he doesn't have what to deposit in that food basket. Everyone, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account, if you're on the road and you don't have enough food in your backpack to establish an Eruv, then you're considered an ani. You don't have the food with which to establish an Eruv with food. So your only choice, right, the only thing you've got left is to do it with your feet. But you're not going to get there in time. And so now you can take advantage of this special leniency that Rav Yosef, sort of explained. It was Rav Nachman, his understanding of that dispute between Yehuda and Meir. But the way it comes out is that person, the traveler on the road, he can declare, okay, that spot by the tree or that spot in that settlement, that's going to be my Shabbos dwelling. And because he's on the road, he can do that. But the people who are back in town, if they try to declare that Shabbos dwelling, they can't do it. Just like the case of Rabba bar Rav Chanan. They can't declare from the couch in their living room that intermediate town is my Shabbos dwelling, right? They needed to go there earlier on Friday or send someone there to make that the Shabbos dwelling for them. They can't just make that declaration, only a traveler on the road. And that's why Rav Huna says this special case, this guy gets to do it because he is on the road. He's not on the road to the place where he's going to make the Shabbos dwelling. He's on the road to the other town. How do we know he's on the road? Because he has a home there. So we can assume that is his intention. Rabbi Yosef says about this case, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, just the fact that he intended to go for this purpose is enough. He doesn't actually have to take the first step. In other words, he's planning to go to the other town, and along the way, he's going to be able to acquire that intermediate town as his Shabbos dwelling. So this is definitely his intention. But before he actually leaves the house, his friend says to him, it's late, it's very hot out there, it's very cold out there, just spend the night here Friday night, and then you could set out in the morning. It's enough that he intended to go out on the road before Shabbos began, according to Rabbi Yosef, in order for him to acquire that Shabbos dwelling in the intermediate town along the way. Rabbah says, no. He has to say, there is a spot that I can identify specifically between the two towns that I want to be my Shabbos dwelling. He's got to say it. He's got to declare it. Rabbi Yehuda says it's enough that he sets out on the road. He has to set out on the road, right? He can't. If his friend says no, don't go, and he never took the first step of the journey, not enough. Because why? Because he has to become a traveler. According to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda's son, the fact that he intended to go makes him a traveler. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no. To be a traveler, you got to get on the road. You don't have to take more than one step. Once you take a step out of the house, okay, you showed your intention to go traveling. Now your friend can call you back and say, no, you could just spend the night here. But because you are a traveler, you're just spending the night here, you get that intermediate place as your Shabbos dwelling. Rav Yosef says, what's going on here is that all agree he must actually set out on the road. He must set out on the road. He's got to take the first step of the journey. How many times have we heard that? A journey, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Right? You got to take that first step. But like Rabbi Yosef says, you don't have to declare. Right? You don't have to say that I'm going traveling and I want that dwelling in between to be my Shabbos dwelling. It's enough that if you went out on the road and you understand what the law is, clearly that's what you intended to happen. All you have to do is take the first step of the journey and you acquire that intermediate town as your dwelling. You don't actually have to say it. And the law is, you don't need to actually say it. You do need to take the first step of the journey. As we said before, Rabbi Meir says one who attempts to establish a new Eruv, but it doesn't happen, right? He sends his agent there. The agent fails in his task. So he didn't get the new Eruv. Previously, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda had agreed that if there was a doubt, right? If you sent someone to establish an Eruv for you, you sent somebody out as your agent, and then you had reason to believe that it didn't happen for some reason, or maybe two people went out in different directions, and you're not even sure if they both set up an Eruv for you, or neither, or one did, the other didn't. You just don't know. Case of uncertainty. That's where all agree that you're in the Hammer Gamel situation. You're caught between the two Eruvs and you get the stringency of both. You can only move around on Shabbos in the area that is overlapping between the two Shabbos borders. One in the town, in the dwelling where you started before you sought to shift your dwelling elsewhere, and the other, the dwelling that you sought to shift to. Here in this Mishnah, we're told that there's no uncertainty. You know you didn't get the Shabbos dwelling in the place that you asked your agent to set it up for you. You know you didn't get it, but nevertheless, because you sought to disqualify your present dwelling as your Shabbos dwelling, you lose it. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Once you didn't establish the new Shabbos dwelling, you keep the one that you've got. You keep the border as it is now. But Rabbi Meir is more stringent, and he says you only get the overlapping area between the two Shabbos Tehumim, between the two Shabbos boundaries. And that's it for our discussion of Mishnah number 6. I want to keep this moving because I want to get to the very colorful story of Acher. Okay, Mishnah number 7, here on page 52. One who intentionally, not for the purpose of performing a mitzvah, went out beyond his Shabbos limit, even if only 1 cubit, may not reenter. Rabbi Eliezer says if he went out 2 cubits, he may reenter. However, if he went out 3 cubits, he may not reenter. Now, this doesn't sound on first listen like it's going to be an incredibly inspiring spiritual teaching, but it is. So, how does this work? Okay, in the Gemara, Rabbi Hanina is going to explain that, okay, so first of all, let's just back up a step. We saw that the whole issue here is where you have a Shabbos boundary. If you leave your Shabbos boundary, if you find yourself outside your Shabbos boundary, if you went out there to perform a mitzvah, you're going to get certain leniencies, and as long as you're within 2,000 cubits of the Shabbos boundary, you can pretty much get back. If you, that's if you went out there for a mitzvah. If you were taken out against your desire, right? Circumstances beyond your control pulled you out of your boundary, then you're going to be limited to the 4 cubits where you are. You kind of have to be frozen in place. You can't really move around. If the same circumstances that pulled you out put you back in, then you reacquire your boundary, but you're not going to be able to re-enter it. Now this is different. This is where you left it intentionally. So, like, who is this pious person who's going to heed this ruling, but also intentionally left his boundary? Well, maybe, he had a choice to make. It was just something that he just chose to violate this prohibition, but he doesn't want to violate any more prohibitions. This is actually a very, a very holy stance, right? Sometimes we make mistakes. Okay, we made mistakes. We don't throw away our whole religious practice because we made one mistake, right? He did it intentionally. He acknowledges that he did it intentionally, that he shouldn't have done it. He made a choice. But now he doesn't want to compound his error, so he's going to just, stop. But the sages are saying, well, how far did you go when you left your Shabbos boundary? Okay, so the Mishna says, if you're outside it even 1 cubit, you cannot re-enter. Rabbi Hanina is going to say it's stricter than that. Even if 1 foot leaves the Shabbos boundary, you cannot re-enter. You're outside, and I guess you can't pull your foot back in. But Rabbi Hanina's teaching is going to conflict with another teaching. This other teaching says that a person is considered to stand wherever the majority of his body is. So if the only thing that's left his Shabbos boundary is 1 foot, well, then he himself is still in the boundary, and he should be, according to this teaching, able to pull his foot back. Who says that? Acherim. Others. The word Acherim is others in Hebrew. Who are Acherim? Right? Normally, when we get a conflicting teaching, we learn who said it. Right? Rabbi Meir says this, but Rabbi Yehuda says that. Rabbi Shimon says this, but Rabbi Yosef says that. Now it just says others say. Who are these others? Acherim. Who is Acherim? Now, we have a teaching in Tractate Horayos, right? Another tractate in the Talmud that we're going to get to in about 4 years, at 1 page a day. And in Horayos, so Horayos is decisions. That tractate is about decisions made by the Sanherdrin or by a local court, sometimes in error, and then when the judges make a mistake and it affects the people's behavior, sometimes offerings need to be brought, sometimes the poor decision needs to be publicized. It's sort of like what we do when the judges make a poor decision. How do we handle that situation? That's what that tractate is all about. Okay, over in that tractate, on Daf Yudalit, so on page 14, it tells the story of when Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasi had a conflict with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Nasi, the chief rabbi, the head of the Sanherdrin. What happened? So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the son of Rabban Gamliel. Okay, so the great Rabban Gamliel, who really did so much to establish Torah in Israel. Rabban Gamliel was there when the temple was destroyed. And so was this generation of sages that included Rabbi Akiva, right? He became a sage before the temple was destroyed, and then he saw it destroyed. Elisha ben Abuye was another one in that generation, Rabban Gamliel was there, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was there, and he's the one that secured the permission from the Roman general, I think Vespasian, who was besieging Jerusalem, that even though he was going to destroy the temple, at least the sages could leave safely and establish the seat of learning no longer in Jerusalem, but in the little town of Yavne. And that's why this whole rabbinic tradition did not die when the temple was destroyed. At any rate, they had to establish this, this institution, right, the Sanherdrin and the learning, and so it would go on. And it was very important that they would have this sort of, the conventions and the rules and the laws and the methods of the rabbinic institution so that it would go forward. Eventually, Rabban Gamliel died, and he was succeeded in the position of the Nasi, at least eventually, by his son, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Shimon ben Gamliel thought it was and he was a great Nasi, a great leader, but one of the things that he thought was important is that the authority of the position which he occupied should really be respected, and it should be distinguished from the other sages. I mean, he was the Nasi, right? So the other sages looked to him as the chief, but he thought that there should be certain conventions in place that would demonstrate to everybody who the Nasi is. So on a day when the senior sages, second only to him, which at that time was Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasi, were not present in the study hall, he told everybody, okay, when any senior sage walks in, like Rabbi Meir, everybody stands up. That was already the practice. But if the second in command, like Rabbi Nasi, enters the room, then everybody stands up, and the front row sort of turns and faces everybody, and then everybody else sits down, but they remain standing until the Nasi reaches his place, until the second in command, Rabbi Nasi, reaches his place, and then they all sit down together. And if the Nasi enters, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, if he enters, everyone stands up, the whole room, when he enters, and they all wait until he reaches his place, and he sits down, and then they all sit down with him. So when Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasi heard about this, they said, you're taking a little too much on yourself. And they wanted to show him that, he's invested with this important office, but it's not like his learning, his Torah, is greater than that of the other people in the room. So they sort of came up with this plan where they would quiz him about one of the tractates, a bunch of laws that now that the temple was gone, sort of some purity laws having to do with the temple that were somewhat obscure and nobody else knew about them. And when, very few people were experts in those laws. And so then when they would, ask him about those laws, it would sort of show everybody that it's not like he's the biggest expert in the room, that he should get all this authority and sort of pomposity and grandeur. But one of the other guys in the room sort of heard what Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasi were planning, and he went and learned those laws, and he learned them out loud while sitting behind Shimon ben Gamliel. And Shimon ben Gamliel heard him reciting those laws. He's like, why are you learning those? He said, because they're really important, and they might be important to you very soon, so I suggest you learn them. And Shimon ben Gamliel did learn them. And then later, when Meir and Nasi started to quiz Shimon ben Gamliel on those laws, he was ready, and he sort of proved his worth in front of everybody. But he never forgot, and he didn't like it. And so Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasi were sort of, demoted, if not officially, then in certain ways that were significant. And eventually, when the Mishna got set down, the Mishna project, which was begun by Rabbi Akiva, and then his main student was Rabbi Meir, and so Rabbi Meir was very involved in sort of formulating all the Mishnas in the sort of most compact and clear way that were going to become, the codified Mishnah. And then eventually they were written down because they were afraid that the Roman persecution was going to become so extreme that everybody might be killed and all these teachings would be lost. And who was it that set those down? Who was the editor of the Mishnah? That was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and the great Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was his father, Shimon ben Gamliel, right? So Yehuda HaNasi, just known as Rebbe, was the son of this Shimon ben Gamliel. And so when it came time to edit the Mishnah, he had a bit of a bee in his bonnet about Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nosson. So whenever we read in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, some say that refers to Rabbi Nosson. When we read Acherim, others say that's Rabbi Meir. Now, you know that we hear Rabbi Meir's name all the time. Very often we hear Rabbi Meir's name. So does that mean that every time, he gave a teaching in his own name, his name was removed? Obviously not. Acherim is not used that often. We also know that since Rabbi Meir was so instrumental in sort of formulating and codifying all the Mishnas, that an unattributed Mishnah, where it doesn't say, some say, others say, this person says, or that person says, when it's unattributed, simply the law is, that was formulated by Rabbi Meir. So maybe it's that he didn't get the attributions in all the unattributed Mishnas. And maybe that was this punishment that sort of started with Shimon ben Gamliel and continued with his son, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So which are the teachings where it becomes others say, Acherim? And what I heard today, and it's said in a few other places, I heard it today from Shmuley Bornstein teaching his Daf Yomi Shir, that where it says Acherim, it's not just that Rabbi Meir said it and that's why his name got changed to others say, because Rabbi Meir's name appears all the time, or when it's an unattributed Mishnah, we know it's Rabbi Meir. But when his name gets substituted as Acherim, others say, Acherim, others, Acherim just means others, those are cases where Rabbi Meir is transmitting a teaching that he learned from his other Rebbe, his other teacher. He had two primary teachers, Akiva and Elisha ben Abuye. So who was Elisha ben Abuye? Elisha ben Abuye would come to be known as Acher, other, the other one. They wouldn't even say his name. I think there might be a couple places where his name actually is in the Talmud, but generally he's referred to as Acher. It's like his name was removed from the tradition. Why? Because he went bad. He went really bad. So how did he go bad? There's a couple different stories, that are told about how he went bad. One is that at one point, he was he's a gifted Torah scholar. I mean, he was brilliant. He was one of the most brilliant ones of his generation, along with Akiva and Eliezer. But Elisha ben Abuye, one day he saw, there are two mitzvahs in the Torah, two commandments that say that if you do them, your life will be extended. You will have long life. You'll be rewarded with long life. What are they? One is to honor your parents, right? That's in the Ten Commandments, which many say is the most difficult commandment to fulfill. It shouldn't be, but if you think about to properly honor your parents, every time you're sarcastic with your parents or you neglect your parents, you're violating one of the Ten Commandments. It's not easy to do it correctly. But if you do it correctly, you'll have long life. And the other one is the easiest commandment in the whole Torah to observe. That if you're going to pull an egg out of a bird's nest, then before you pull the egg out, just shoo the mother away. You don't have to hurt her. You don't have to slaughter her. You don't have to do anything difficult. Just get her out of the way so she's not present immediately there when you take an egg from the nest. It's such a simple act of kindness. But for doing that, the Torah says you'll be rewarded with long life. Well, Elisha ben Abuye saw a situation where a father said to his son, go up in that nest and get an egg. Please bring an egg down and make sure you shoo the mother away. And so the son climbed the ladder to the nest, obeying his father, shooed the mother away, took the egg, started to climb down, fell, and tragically died. And Elisha ben Abuye said, I mean, if this is possible, then maybe the whole Torah is false. And according to this story, what he didn't understand is, none of the rewards that are spelled out in the Torah are like a quid pro quo in this world. We all know that in this world, the righteous often suffer and the wicked often prosper. But what we also know is that there is a reward for every good deed in the greater world, in the world to come. When we're all, we are souls, we have bodies, we are eternal beings, and when we return to the world of souls where we come from, there will be a reward for everything that we did righteously in this place. But for Elisha ben Abuye, seeing this was enough to make him bad. That's one story. The other story, possibly more famous and more what I want to talk about, is this classic tale that 4 entered Pardes. Pardes means the orchard, but it is also the root word of paradise. That's where the word paradise comes from. And what it refers to is Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Really what it refers to is the upper world, the real world. Right? This physical world is just this transitory place that God created to hide God's presence. Here we all have free will, and we can choose whether, to have faith or not have faith, do good, not do good. We're not overwhelmed by God's presence because God's presence is hidden. But when you go up into the real world, the greater world, well, God's presence there is revealed, all the time. There's no unawareness of God, the creator and the sustainer of all the universes when you're in that world. That world is purposely sealed off. We read when Adam and Eve were kicked out of Gan Eden, they left that world, right? They were not allowed to return, right? There was an angel with an ever-turning sword stationed outside the Garden of Eden, meaning humans are barred entry. But occasionally, certain people, because of their great desire and their great skill in learning, are able to enter that world. When you do that, when you have that kind of mystical journey, mystical experience, you do that at great risk. It is not for everybody. 4 sages were able to have that journey. Akiva, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, and Elisha ben Abuye. Ben Azai ascended into that world, saw what was going on, and died. It might be that sort of the divine kiss. In other words, once his soul returned to that world, it like our souls are so much more at home in that world that they don't want to come back here. Right? It's against our will that our souls come here. We're ordered to come here. We're sent on a mission. But we'd much rather be up there than, in this physical universe. So when his soul was, back in the world where it came from, it's like, I'm home. And his soul flew out of his body, stayed there, and Ben Azai perished. Ben Zoma was able to come back, but his soul was so turned around by that mystical experience that even when he came back, he was like never fully here again. He was damaged, right? He was damaged in some way. Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, he was damaged. He was never the same. Akiva was the only one who entered in peace and returned in peace. Akiva is likened to Moses. He's almost at the level of Moses. Akiva can go there in peace and return in peace. Not really for the average person. Elisha ben Abuye was as brilliant a scholar in many ways as Akiva and Eliezer and all the great scholars of his generation. But when he went there, something happened. Something happened. And when he came back, he lost his faith. It's not that he lost his belief in God and the higher world. He'd witnessed it. But he lost his desire to conduct himself like a righteous person and a Torah scholar. So different accounts are given of what it is that happened while he was there. One story is that what he actually saw there is the angel Metatron, who is like Michael, the highest of the archangels, God's chief assistant, sitting down and writing all the deeds of mankind. He's an angel. He's able to do that, and he's literally recording in the book everything that everybody does in this world. Now, how does that make you go bad? That's like, we're all told that happens. He witnesses it. You would think that would just, when he comes back, he's going to be like so utterly filled with faith and a desire to do good, etc. Somehow it makes him go bad. And so what, some sages explain that what it's like he saw what he wanted to see. He saw an angel sitting down, and he had been told that angels never sit down. Angels are never tired. Angels, cannot be diminished in any way. So if he saw an angel sitting down, then it must be like there's some other force other than God who somehow, wears on God's angels and God's representatives. And so he came back as some kind of dualist, like there's not only one, right? That God is the sole creator, etc. Somehow Elisha ben Abuye said, you know what? He's not the only power. There's other power. And maybe, I need to figure out what that is. Now, to have such a thought and to say, he said it. He actually said that while he was there. He was immediately like kicked out. They said, who are you to come and say something like that here? And he was kicked out, and it went bad in that mystical journey. But then then he started to behave badly. And pretty soon in his life, like he just sort of left all his practice behind. He had no desire anymore to do good, to avoid sin. He went and found basically a prostitute and was with her. And she's like, what are you doing? You're a Torah scholar. Why are you with me? He's like, that was me before. Now I'm something else. And she's like, oh, I guess you're the other. And that's where he came to be called Acher. A prostitute gave him that name. And he just went so bad. But he did receive one more heavenly communication. He was walking by the ruins of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and a bas kol came. A voice from heaven came, and he heard it. And the voice from heaven is sort of always emanating from the Temple Mount and saying to all the Jews of the world, return, return, my people, return, my wayward children. You're always welcome. I'm always waiting for you. Right? And every Jew who sins has heard this voice. He normally says, it's not a divine voice, it's my conscience. This idea of guilt and Judaism goes together. It's because, when you do wrong, you feel it. That is that heavenly voice speaking to you. And maybe not in words, but you hear it. But when he heard it, when Acher heard it, it said, return all my wayward children and return to your home. I'm waiting for you, all but Acher. Not Acher. In other words, Acher heard a voice from heaven say, you can't return. Your teshuvah, your atonement is no longer possible. It doesn't matter if you give up your sordid evil ways that you've taken on, you've gone too far. And man, once he heard that there's no way for him to get back, so why even try? He went much worse. Not just sins of sexual immorality and eating unkosher foods. He went much further. Eventually, he collaborated with the Romans and used his Torah knowledge to help the Romans oppress the Jews. When the Romans banned Shabbos observance, how did they know what the rules of Shabbos observance were so that they could enforce those rules? They got that information from Acher. So he became such a persona non grata, such an enemy of the Jewish people, the true Jew-hating Jew. And they wanted nothing to do with him. Rabbi Meir, who was his student and who had learned so much Torah from Acher, didn't want to give up on his teacher. And so he kept seeing him and talking with him and having conversations, and his agenda whenever he would talk with Acher is to get him to make a teshuvah, get him to atone, get him to come back. And Acher would say, what are you talking about? Heaven told me, God told me I can't come back. Everyone can make a teshuvah. This is the exception that proves the rule. No matter what you've done, no matter what evil you've committed, God is waiting for you to turn it around, to come back and say, I was wrong, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean you won't be punished. It doesn't mean you won't have to pay a price. But you can come home to your Father in heaven. Everyone. But God said everyone except Acher. So Acher would say to Rabbi Meir, everyone except me. What point is there in my atoning? I can't atone. God told me I can't atone. I've gone too far. Now, I read a great article today where Rabbi Ari Kahn explained even that statement from God to Acher, that actually was a kindness when he said, you can't atone. Because what God was saying to him is, no, you're out. You're out. You're not going to be able to make a pragmatic choice to come back. What he was talking about there is, some say that the reason Acher went bad is because he originally became a Torah scholar for the wrong reason. At his bris, right, when he was born, at his circumcision, on the 8th day of his life, his father, who was very rich, made a huge party. His father was not involved in Torah at all. He was just a very rich Jew in Jerusalem. But he made a party, invited everybody, all the big businessmen, and the Torah scholars of the town, because they're very honored people. And, well, the rich people were talking about houses and vacation homes and donkeys and horses and whatnot. And the sages started getting into a very lively discussion about some point of Torah, but they did it in a very entertaining way. And the father of Elisha ben Abuye noticed that people were being drawn to the sages because they were really dynamic speakers, and they were able to convey Torah in a way that was attractive and entertaining, and that sort of gave them importance in the eyes of the population. And so then the father said, oh, it's good to be a Torah scholar. It makes you important. I'm going to make sure that my son gets that kind of education. And so he sort of put his son into that Torah education along with the sages, and eventually became one of the most brilliant of them, and a great, great, renowned and important Torah scholar, right? And we have a teaching that, if you study Torah for the wrong reason, it's okay, because you'll come to study it for the right reason. So it didn't matter. It didn't matter. But Acher himself sort of came to believe, he'd been thrust into it for the wrong reason. It was really just to acquire power. Then he had that vision. He was able to go to, the highest point that a Torah scholar could possibly ascend to witness the Torah in heaven, in the company of Akiva, right? But Akiva went there with an utter devotion to God. So did Ben Azai and Ben Zoma. One died, one went crazy, but it wasn't because, they had the wrong thoughts up there. Their love of God was absolute. Acher was this guy who was so smart, but always calculating, always looking for an edge, always looking for the win. And so he had these totally, otherworldly, wrong worldly thoughts when he was in that situation. And it's like he was just looking for the, He was also somebody who witnessed the temple destroyed by the Romans. And so he thought, well, we've been told that this happened because we didn't merit to keep the temple, but maybe it's just because a greater power has arisen, and that power is backing Rome. Again, this dualist idea, terrible idolatrous idea. But he said, maybe I should seek out that other power. Right? So when God says to Acher, you can't come back. Anyone can make an atonement. Anyone can come back. Except you're out. Really, according to Rabbi Ari Kahn, that was an opportunity for Acher to eventually just break down and beg God to accept his atonement. He shouldn't have been so intellectual, right? One of the great lessons of this is that people with huge brains can really wander into evil behavior. They could just lose the plot because they're so smart and they can find some kind of intellectual justification for anything, and they just wander way off the right course. That's what happened to Elisha ben Abuye. And the hope, perhaps, was that eventually he would break down. And he really never did in his whole life. He never sort of begged God to take him back, except on his deathbed. Rabbi Meir was there when Acher lay dying and said, now, beg God forgiveness. Now make your teshuvah. And Elisha ben Abuye said, how can I? I've gone so far. Why would he accept me? He says, no human, no child of God can go so far that his father won't want him back. You'll be punished. You'll have to pay for all your sins. But you're loved. You're loved. Beg for his forgiveness. And Elisha ben Abuye did. On his deathbed, he finally made that atonement. We'll encounter aspects of this story a few more times in our 7.5-year journey. But this was our introduction to Acher. How do we get there? Because Rabbi Meir, when he would repeat teachings, the valid teachings, right, of Elisha ben Abuye before he went bad, they were important teachings that were registered in the Mishna. But no one wanted to learn anything associated with Elisha ben Abuye, the evil Elisha ben Abuye. So if Rabbi Meir was repeating one of those teachings, one of Acher's teachings, then it wouldn't say Rabbi Meir says, it would say others say, Acherim. And by the way, Acher and Meir, right, the words of that come out to Acherim. The letters used to spell Acher and Meir are the same letters that spell Acherim. Good. The only thing else that I want to add is this same Mishnah, Mishnah number 7, right? It says also that Rabbi Eliezer says, if he went out 2 cubits, he may reenter, but 3 cubits he may not reenter. So we get that, because if he's gone to the edge of his 2,000 cubits limit for Shabbos boundary, that's his place. His place is 4 cubits, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, we learn he's in the middle of his 4 cubits, so he has 2 more cubits. He can go 2,002, and he hasn't left his Shabbos boundary since his own place is 4 cubits wide. If it's at the edge of the 2,000, he gets 2 more cubits. The Gemara says, but there's a difficulty because we have another Baraisa, which says that Rabbi Eliezer himself said that if you get to the end of 2,000 cubits, you may not take even 1 more cubit. So that contradicts that he says here in this Mishnah that you could take 2 more cubits. And so the Gemara explains, no, that's something different. That's not that just you're at the edge of your Shabbos boundary, but that we learned earlier that if you don't know where your Shabbos boundary is, you can count steps from your dwelling. And when you reach 2,000 steps, you can't go a step further, not 1 step further. Even if you're in a cave, which is like the most enclosed possible space, you can't take 1 step further if you've counted steps. Is it important to mention this now? Because of the famous story between Acher and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was in the study hall, and people said, oh, that teacher of yours is outside. They wouldn't even say his name. It was Shabbos. Rabbi Meir went out to see him, and Acher was riding a horse, like a Roman, right? The sages would ride donkeys. Jews ride donkeys. A donkey's a very elegant animal at that time to be riding. But a horse is like, like a big garish thing that is for the Romans, right? But Acher's all involved with the Romans, so he's riding a horse. And Rabbi Meir comes running up to him and says, wait, let me talk to you. He says, well, I'm going this way. Well, let me walk beside you. So on Shabbos, Rabbi Meir is walking next to Acher, who's riding on a horse. And he's making his pitch again. You can make teshuvah. This is not at the end of his life, right? It's in the middle. He's like, you could come back, make teshuvah. And the guy's like, no, I can't. And I can't. And he gives a bunch of teachings and reasons and proofs. And he has all his mind is so agile. He has all these demonstrations and proofs why he can't come back, even beside from the fact that he heard from God that he can't come back. But then at a certain point in their conversation, Acher says, Meir, stop. Go back. And Meir says, well, why now? We've been having a good conversation. And Acher says, because you've reached the 2,000 limits, 2,000 cubits of your boundary. Acher was counting steps while riding the horse so that his student shouldn't be distracted and go outside the boundary. So Meir said, and so it's the same teaching, you can't go even one step beyond your 2,000. And if you do, you'll be outside your boundary and stuck. So Acher looks out for Meir and he says, go back. Meir says, I'll go back and you go back. You can go back. You can go back. You can go back. But he wasn't ready to go back yet. And then, just because it's here and we don't want to skip a Mishnah, the 8th Mishnah has almost no discussion. It only says that if you're going to a town and you made, your Shabbos dwelling on the road as a traveler, because you established it, and now you're heading to a town, but you were wrong. Like the Shabbos dwelling that you established actually came up just 1 cubit short. 2,000 cubits from your Shabbos dwelling didn't get you to the town where you were going. So it says you can't make it. You fell short. You can't go in. But then we learn, according to Rabbi Shimon, well, the way that they established city limits, they always made them that the limit is actually 15 cubits further out than where they told people, so they would have a little bit of a margin of error. So if you made it to the town and you ran out of your 2,000 steps, but you're with less than 15 steps away from the city limits, you made it. That's Mishnah number 8. That concludes our discussion of chapter 4 in Tractate Eruvin and our discussion of Acher and Rabbi Meir, his student. Let's see if you've got questions and comments. Diana Ruth Davidson Lerner, shalom from San Diego. I did that. So Diane, I'm so glad that you are out of the hospital, and we want to hear from you that you've had a complete and speedy recovery. Mark Price, I am drawing Venn diagrams and making 3D models from drinking straws here, trying to make sense of all of this. Just today I got my whiteboard and I plan to start using it, but I didn't start today because there was so much to talk about. But hopefully I will be making Venn diagrams when needed. Let's see, Pam Simmons, this was similar to yesterday. Just to say it doesn't make it so. Exactly. You could make the declaration as long as it was a specific place, and you could get there if you ran before Shabbos began, but somebody on his couch can't do it, right? That leniency for the traveler on the road only applies to the traveler on the road, not the guy on his couch. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Right. And Nina's saying, Mike Scheffler says, some say, others say, is fascinating. Never realized so many layers to read this properly. Great explanation. Thank you, Mike. All right, that's what I've got for us today. I think I've run pretty long, but I think it was worth it to hear about Acher. There's so much in his story. By the way, Joy Lynn says, this means so very much to me. I had a near-death experience, and it's difficult in some ways. I'm so glad I was able to attend your talk tonight. And I'm glad you did too, Joy. People who've heard my story certainly don't have time now. But I at my grandmother's passing, I had a shared death experience that was very powerful. And a lot of people have had those kinds of experiences. It's just like it's a glimpse, right? We didn't enter that world, but we got a glimpse beyond the veil. We didn't enter like Akiva and Elisha ben Abuye, ben Azai and ben Zoma. But I think an important takeaway, even for those who are not, mystically attuned, this idea that the greatest brains in a generation can go bad, right? They can lose their moral compass because of the way they harness their intelligence to justify things that they just want to do. It's just things they want to do. And then they can come up with all kinds of very intelligent rationalizations and justifications. Doesn't make it right. We really have to be careful. This can happen to all of us. we have to be careful to attach ourselves to a source of eternal values. May you have a good evening and a great Shabbos coming in tomorrow night, along with the festival of our rejoicing. Sukkot is literally called Hag Simchatenu, the festival of our rejoicing. And may it be a time